Well, if you have been following the numbers, then you know that there does seem to finally be some light at the end of the tunnel. But at least for now, we should still all be doing our best to stay at home and help those in the medical field and other essential workers get us through to the other side. But this certainly hasn't been easy for anyone, and even if you are one of the few people who has been lucky enough to be minimally affected by this whole thing, you are probably at this point still managing to run out of ways to distract or entertain yourself while you wait for the all clear. And for those of us who usually rely on sports for that distraction, this has definitely been difficult. So this week, I decided to come up with a few suggestions of things to watch. And even if you can't find any of these on Netflix, Hulu, or wherever you usually get your content from, I assure you every movie on this list is very much worth buying if you haven't already. And so with that said, here is my list for the top 10 sports movies of all time. Welcome to Casual Friday. Now, there are a lot of sports movies out there, and I certainly haven't seen all of them, although I have seen my fair share. So if your favorite one isn't on this list, it's possible I haven't seen it, so please do let me know about what that is down in the comment section below. I also decided not to include documentaries because I felt like those were different enough that that's kind of its own thing. So as great as something like Senna is, for example, it's not going to be on this list. Although, as we do get into the honorable mentions, there is one exception for the movies I haven't seen rule, and that is Slapshot. Now, to be honest, I don't actually know how I've managed to go this long without having seen Slapshot, and I do intend on fixing that as soon as I can. But this movie does show up on pretty much any list of best sports movies of all time that you will find, and I have heard pretty good things about it, so I felt like it was worth mentioning. And there are a few more honorable mentions of movies that I do really like, but just didn't quite make my list, and those are Happy Gilmore, D2, and Coach Carter. Although if you are going to see D2, you should still watch the first Mighty Ducks movie first, but you can definitely skip the third one. We start off the list with We Are Marshall. Based on a true story and released in 2006, the movie follows the 1970-71 Marshall University football team. After a tragic plane crash claims the lives of most of the players and coaching staff, new head coach Matthew McConaughey and his remaining players try to pick up the pieces to save the football program at Marshall University. It's a story of tragedy and triumph, although, to be honest, when this movie came out, I did kind of expect it to be a little bit better than it was. Don't get me wrong, it's still a fantastic movie, but it felt kind of like when you have a friend that really hypes up a movie, and then when you go to see it, even if it's still pretty good, you are left maybe a little bit underwhelmed. Although in this case, it's not so much a friend that's doing the hyping up as it is the story itself. In my opinion, the story that this movie is based on is one of the best, although saddest in the history of sports. And although the movie isn't free of its faults, I still do think that it does a at least good job of telling the story. Plus, at least I personally don't mind Matthew McConaughey, at least when he's not trying to sell me a Lincoln. Again, based on a true story and released in 2011, Moneyball follows the early 2000s Oakland A's. In the movie, with A's upper management refusing to pay a competitive amount of money to that of the other teams in the league, GM Brad Pitt has to get creative. He and his new stat man Jonah Hill have to swim upstream against traditional methods of scouting to find diamonds in the rough like Chris Pratt in order to field a winning team. In the history of sports, this story is a big and definitely important one, as these guys were among the first to take stats this seriously when considering players, and really helped kick off the statistical revolution. Obviously, for it to be on this list, I do really like this movie, and really my only problem with it is that it revolves around and glorifies an Oakland A's team that robbed my Mariners of a couple of playoff trips, which, for the Mariners, is not something that you can take lightly. Ford vs. Ferrari just came out this last year, so you may be a little bit more familiar with it. And as this is once again based on a true story, you might start to be seeing a little bit of a pattern here. But what can I say, that's one of the funny things about sports. Sometimes they have a way of coming up with stories that are better than anything that we could come up with on our own. In the movie, Matt Damon and his fearless driver Christian Bale are hired by Ford to seek revenge on Ferrari for a business deal gone awry. And they choose to seek this revenge by taking it to Ferrari on their own turf at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. To me, this is one of the best racing movies of all time. So if you're experiencing withdrawals from some racing, then I highly suggest this movie if you haven't already seen it. Unless, of course, you're, I guess, a NASCAR-only type of fan, in which case, I guess, Talladega Nights is a fantastic option as well. But back to Ford vs. Ferrari, although the movie does take some liberties with the time frame that the story actually happened in, the movie certainly does not disappoint. Great acting, plenty of action, and a story that keeps on giving. If you are into movies with fast cars and rebellious protagonists, this one is certainly the movie for you. And if you are into documentaries and have seen this movie, then I highly recommend watching The 24-Hour War, which goes into this story in much more detail. Look, I promise not every movie on this list is going to be based on a true story, but with Invincible, this one still is. Released in 2006, Invincible follows Mark Wahlberg, who is just another dude living in Philly, until the Eagles, who suck, decide to hold open tryouts. So after some coercing, he decides to go to those tryouts, but unfortunately doesn't make the team. Roll credits. Okay, so obviously he does catch the eye of the coaches, is invited to minicamp, and against all odds eventually does make the team. Now, I feel like every sports fan, at least if you grew up being a fan of sports, at some point dreamed of being a pro athlete. And although the vast majority of us didn't make it and will never get even close, even into our 20s, 30s, and 40s, a lot of us still like to, from time to time, think about what that life could be like. So for anyone else like me who still likes to occasionally imagine themselves out on that field with tens of thousands of people cheering you on, this movie is definitely for you. And even though he didn't go on to catch the winning touchdown in a Super Bowl, be an MVP, or even really be that much of a regular player, he still did get to play in the NFL and for the hometown team, which, in the end, is really the dream. See? Told you not all these movies would be based on a true story. Although with Caddyshack, I kinda wish it was, as this movie pokes fun at country club culture. Newcomer Chevy Chase and his very Chevy Chasey attitude clash heads with the country club regulars, all while groundskeeper Bill Murray goes to war with a persistent and rather destructive gopher. So if you're looking for something a little bit more lighthearted with its fair share of laughs, then Mr. Murray and Caddyshack can certainly help you out. With Space Jam, most of you already know what this movie is all about, and if you don't or haven't seen it, then I want you to go ahead and just pause this video right now and just go watch it. But if you don't remember, after the Michael Jordan highlight reel, this movie starts out with him struggling in minor league baseball, all up until he's pulled into Looney Tune land by Bugs Bunny. There, Bugs and the other Looney Tunes convince Michael to help them beat a group of aliens who have come to imprison them and set them up as a sideshow in their theme park. Admittedly, this is a very goofy movie and is boosted up quite a bit by the nostalgic value that it offers, especially for those of us that grew up in the 80s and 90s. At the very least, though, it is an absolute cult classic and was at least good enough for Warner Brothers to feel like they had to force out a second one 15 years later. Plus, as an added bonus, if you didn't get enough of Bill Murray from Caddyshack, then he does play a very key role in this movie as well. Here we do go back to the based on a true story movies with 42. This movie, released in 2013, is based on the story of Jackie Robinson, and if you don't know who that is, that probably means you don't know or care that much about baseball. In the movie, Harrison Ford goes out on a limb by signing Jackie Robinson, played by Chadwick Boseman, and in the process breaking the color barrier in baseball. The story of Jackie Robinson is one of the biggest and most important ones in the history of sports. And to me at least, this movie does a very good job of depicting that story, Jackie's role, and just how difficult that role was for him to play. If you are a baseball fan or even somewhat of a history buff, to me this movie is an absolute must-watch, if you haven't already. Released in 1976, Rocky is the oldest movie on this list. Admittedly, I'm not that big of a fan of boxing movies, or really even boxing in general. But this movie is so good that it goes well beyond being just a boxing movie, and really goes beyond just being a sports movie for that matter. I mean, heck, there's even a statue made for it in Philadelphia. Plus, I mean, this movie, or at least one of its numerous very good sequels, are at the top, or at least near the top, of pretty much any list like this. Sure, The Sandlot is a kid movie, and yes, it does rely on child acting, two things that definitely do not make up key ingredients for an all-time great movie. In fact, they very frequently tend to lean movies in the other direction. But in this movie that follows one summer of main character Scott Small's life, that is certainly not the case. With a fair amount of help from one of the kids in the neighborhood, and armed only with a plastic glove, an ugly fishing hat, and a curiosity for a game he has no idea how to play, over the summer, Smalls makes lifelong friends and develops a lifelong love for the game of baseball. Again, this movie is heavily powered by nostalgia, but to me, it's more than that. To me, this movie is a window into the heart of the game of baseball. It's a movie that every year I make a point to watch as baseball season starts to get going. And especially in a year like this where baseball is delayed, there is no movie that makes me more excited for summer than this one. On top of that, to me, this is one of the most relatable movies ever made. It's a reminder, at least to those of us who are out of school now, of simpler times. Back when there were pretty much only 2 times of year. The summertime when you got to go and hang out with friends, and the rest of the year when you spent that time looking forward to the next summer break. Finishing off this list, I have the 2004 movie, Miracle. At least in the US, there are a few stories that hold more meaning than that of the 1980 US Olympic hockey team. In sports, there are plenty of underdog or David and Goliath type of stories, but few of them come with not just the nation watching, but the entire world. Plus, these stories certainly don't often come with an underdog that is as outmatched as the US team was at Lake Placid. And they also definitely don't come with as much political tension and historical relevance as this story does have. In the movie, Kurt Russell takes his band of college players, many of whom had not played with each other before playing on this team, to the Olympics where they would eventually face the Russian Red Army team. A team that was at that point the best in the world and still is to this day one of the best teams ever assembled. But for me, what makes this movie so great is that it does an incredible job of setting the stage for just how important and unlikely the US's victory in those Olympics was. But it does that without getting overly distracted and caught up in all of the things that surrounded this team, and really just focuses on the fact that this was, in the end, just a team made up of high school kids that were living out their dream in the Olympics. To me, this movie, like some of the other ones towards the top of this list, and the story it's based on, go far beyond being just another sports movie or just another sports story. So for me, it's a mixture of how great this story is, as well as how good a job this movie does of telling that story that make Miracle the best sports movie of all time. Again, if there's any movies on this list you haven't seen, or maybe it's been a while, I definitely do recommend checking them out. I mean, let's be honest, you've probably got plenty of time on your hands. But no matter what, as always, thank you for watching. If you did like this video, please let me know about that by clicking the little thumbs up down there. If you really liked it and want to see more, the subscribe button down here can help you out with that, as well as helping me out a little bit. And since your list of the top 10 sports movies is probably different from what mine is, and I've got some time to kill as well, I'd love to see what you have for your list, so let me know about that in the comment section below. With that, as always, stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Peace.